All right, so we are going to start our next unit, which is going to be over decolonization. And we're going to actually focus today on decolonization in Southeast Asia and India. So we need to start with our first question: what is decolonization? And decolonization really is the end of colonization. It's just like what it sounds. It's when countries begin to get their independence and nations are going to start becoming free, their own nation. We know before World War I and World War II, the idea of imperialism was running very high. European nations were going in and taking advantage of nations in Asia and Africa to exploit resources. But that's really going to come to a halt after World War II. The reasons being, first of all, Japan and Nazi Germany are now going to kind of give discredit to a lot of the imperialist beliefs. People are going to start to see if they can't, they could no longer deny democracy to their imperialist colonies. They felt like because they had fought so hard in World War II to maintain democracy, then they were not going to continue to keep that from their imperial colonies. Also, these European powers are going to be weak. They're not going to have enough strength to fight for their colonies or try to defend their colonies. So it was just a better thing for a lot of these colonies to become independent at this time. The first country or nation that becomes independent that we're going to talk about is India. And you probably recognize this face. This is Mahatma Gandhi, or Mohandas Gandhi. He is the kind of the face of the Indian nationalist movement. And he was extremely instrumental in getting India their independence from the British, and he's going to have a lot of really interesting ways of doing that. First of all, he was a member, or the All right, so the first nation that we're going to talk about getting their independence is India. And you guys probably recognize these pictures right over here. This is the very famous face of Mohandas Gandhi, who becomes just a national icon in India, as well as around the world, as being part of the Indian nationalist movement. And Gandhi is the leader of the Indian National Congress, and he seeks to free the Indians from British control using a non-violent approach. He wants to use this non-violent passive resistance so that to kind of spread the message that the Indian people want their independence, but they're not going to use violence to get it. Winston Churchill is actually going to oppose this Indian independence movement. However, because of this, Gandhi refuses to support Britain in World War II. Now, even though Gandhi does not support Britain, there are some Indian soldiers that fight, and eventually, in 1947, Britain agrees to extend India their independence. Through this struggle of Gandhi fighting for independence is, like I said, he uses nonviolence. And this is a very different cause, because a lot of independence movements that we see in history have lots of revolution and violent uprisings. But Gandhi wanted to do this without violence. He opposed any kind of violence. And a lot of times the Indian people would suffer beatings and violence as the brunt of this, but they never would fight back. He used the policies of civil disobedience. Gandhi urged the Indians to protest unjust laws. This picture that you guys see up here, that is the Salt March, which was led by Gandhi to protest a salt tax. Also, they're going to start moving more toward cottage industries, moving away from buying British-made goods. They're going to make their own goods in cottage industries, and Gandhi is really going to support that. So it's really going to be a nonviolent, civil disobedient geared revolution in India. And as you guys probably know, this is going to be a huge influence for people like Dr. Martin Luther King, who eventually fights for civil rights in the United States. So Gandhi has a big influence on many leaders. Well, Gandhi is able to get India their independence in 1947. However, the British were a little bit hesitant to do that because they knew that the Hindus and the Muslims would have tension. And we've been talking about Hindu and Muslim tension since the days of the Mughal Empire. So the Muslims are going to declare that they want a separate Muslim state. and a big leader in that is going to be Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Instead of that, India is going to be partitioned, or they're going to be split into two separate states, India and Pakistan. India is going to be the state for the Hindu religion. Pakistan is going to be the state for the Muslim religion. And Pakistan is going to be divided between India. You're going to have East Pakistan on the east side of India and West Pakistan on the west side of India. And that's going to be because of the Muslim support on those east and west borders of India. And this is going to cause lots of violence and rioting and fighting, because this big gap between the two Muslim lands in India is going to cause a lot of tension, and there's going to be lots of violence and fighting. As you guys see right here, this is obviously going to show here's going to be West Pakistan and here's going to be East Pakistan. And you're going to obviously, as groups are migrating, there's going to be lots of fighting and unrest between the two religions, between the Hindus and the Muslims, especially right here on these border portions where you're going to have the groups are going to be clashing and have some disputed territory. So as you guys probably could tell from the map, after India gets its independence, there is going to be lots of tension between the Muslims and the Hindus, especially in that region up in northwest India and Pakistan, and that control of that region of Kashmir. They're going to disagree over who the Pakistani or Indians should have control over that land. And so that tension is going to be very high. Gandhi is going to be assassinated by a Hindu extremist. And after this happens, there's going to be lots of fighting and violence and rioting going on in India due to this. But after he is assassinated, a man by the name of Jawaharlal Nehru is going to become India's first prime minister. And he is actually not as famous as his daughter was. Her name is Indira Gandhi, and she is the one here pictured. And she becomes the prime minister after her father does. And she is very famous because she becomes one of the first women to become the head of a major country. And so she's going to politically pave the way for women to be heads of major nations, as well as making lots of political reform and doing lots of good things politically for India. She and her son are both assassinated, but in her rule, in her 15-year rule, she is going to do lots of good things for India and kind of pave the way for women in leadership roles. All right, Pakistan, like I said, was originally east and west. It's split between East Pakistan and West Pakistan. But in 1971, East Pakistan is going to claim their independence and become the Muslim country of Bangladesh. And so fighting is going to follow about this until India intervenes and recognizes Bangladesh as being independent. And as you guys can tell, I didn't point this out in the last map, you can see that the country of Bangladesh is actually surrounded by the country of India on both sides. So that's kind of interesting. You can kind of just see where the trends were and where people were settling at the time. But you are now going to have Pakistan west of India and Bangladesh down at the east of India. It becomes its independent nation. All right, so let's stop and take a quick check. Number one, how did Gandhi work to gain independence for India? Number two, explain the tension between Hindus and Muslims in India. And number three, explain the influence of Indira Gandhi in India. All right. Now we are going to talk a little bit about Asia, East Asia, and some of the changes that are going on during decolonization of Asia. First of all, China. Last time we left off in China, they were run by the communist Mao Zedong. But after Mao Zedong dies, Deng Xiaoping comes in and takes control of China, and he is very against Mao's Cultural Revolution. He wants to modernize China's economy. He disbands the commune, starts producing more consumer goods. Factory buyers and workers are now going to be able to buy, to sell to private buyers. Individuals are going to be allowed to have small businesses, and they're going to open up China to foreign investment. And that's going to bring in new capital and new technology to China. So he is going to bring China's economy up and make them a world power in the economic world. However, while this economic reform is being instituted, they did not give up communism, and that was something that the people really wanted them to give up. In 1989, college students peacefully demonstrated in Beijing's Tiananmen Square, which is just an open square in Beijing. They were fighting for freedom, for democracy, for more rights as citizens, and army tanks opened fire on the demonstrators, and they end up killing hundreds of people. After this happens, Western leaders are going to reduce their trade with China because they strongly disapprove of the Tiananmen Square massacre. And as you guys can see some of these pictures, this is a picture of Tiananmen Square empty, and this is a picture of, they call him Tank Man, standing in front of the tanks protesting, and a lot of people were killed. It was a very tragic event. Eventually the West ended up opening up their trade with China, but it really hurt the relationship for a while. All right, so let's move on to Indochina, or Southeast Asia. And we're going to look here. The Dutch own the East Indies, the British own Burma and Malaysia, and the French controlled most of Indochina. And so at this time, when other nations are getting their independence, there's going to be a feeling of nationalism. We know that nationalist feeling gets us every time, but there's going to be a feeling of nationalism that's going to start to spread to the colonies in Southeast Asia. And so after World War II, a lot of these nationalist leaders expected to achieve their independence because of they were fighting for democracy all over the world in Europe. So now these people are going to want this democracy or this independence extended to them. So the Philippines, they are going to be able to gain independence from the U.S. in 1946. And Burma, Myanmar, and Malaysia are going to be granted independence from Great Britain in 1948. So those are going to be two areas that are going to gain their independence very shortly within the time of each other. However, a little bit more of a violent or troubling independence movements happen in Indonesia and Vietnam. In Indonesia, leaders are going to declare their independence in 1945. However, there's going to fight with the Dutch troops until 1949, until the Netherlands finally recognized the Indonesian independence. And in Vietnam, we're very familiar with the Vietnam War. However, before that Vietnam War with the United States, you're going to have the nationalist leader Ho Chi Minh leads war against the French in 1954, and he is going to be able to gain independence from the French. And then they just divide Vietnam into North and South. And we know that the North is the one who adopts communism, and the South is going to hold true with pro-Western style government. So those are going to be some independence movements that take place in Southeast Asia. And they are going to start to get their independence as other nations begin and have those nationalist feelings and start to gain their independence. So here it just kind of shows you what year a lot of these countries were able to gain their independence, and when they got independence. And you can just kind of see it was just stepping stones to where each country eventually was able to gain their own independence and be free of their imperial leaders. All right, so let's wrap it up. Number one, I want you to explain the Tiananmen Square massacre and how the protesters were standing up for political oppression. How were these protesters standing up for political oppression? And then I want you to summarize the rise of the independence movements in Asia and India. So just give me a summary. How did these independence movements come about, and what was their impact on the world, and how did these independence movements kind of trickle down